Hi, I'm Ryan.
Hey, I'm Jess, and you're listening to Your Therapist Is Not Okay.
On today's episode, we're going to explore EMDR, CBT, and popular therapies that are often seen as a miracle cure or a quick fix. In order to tackle this, we invited an expert, Gina Lihou, who is a registered psychotherapist in Ontario, to respond to some questions that we have for her about EMDR and CBT. She specializes in both of these.
Often, when clients come into our office, there are specific therapies that they have heard about.
Hmm.
Cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT is one of them. Now, with trauma, we're seeing EMDR being one of them. I'm noticing now, especially with psychedelics, we're seeing that. Feels like there are these like catch-all, really important therapies that almost feel like if I do this route of therapy, it's going to solve me.
Hmm. Which, as listeners might remember from the very beginning, what really all about is not solving people, that there's no finished, fixed point of being healed, being fully resolved. Both of us have tried a number of these therapies, and we're still not okay. Um,
Fair.
but we do see a lot of trends showing up in healing approaches.
Yeah.
And we see him show up in therapy, which, we kind of pay a lot of attention to as kind of therapists ourselves. Um, but this shows up in other places too, right? This shows up in, Jess, you were mentioning red light therapy or under eye correction creams.
Oh my goodness. The amount of times someone thinks that collagen is just going to save the day for me is a lot. And I get really like kind of like into this. I'm like, oh, you don't say. This doesn't taste horrible and is going to make all my problems go away in my body. I want to be young again.
I think that really points exactly to this natural tendency that so many of us have to want solutions to our problems that feel tangible and quick, right? Like, oh, I can just take this pill or do this thing for 15 minutes a day and I'm good to go.
Oh yeah. The amount that I've looked into red light therapy and like trying to find one that's like inexpensive enough for the likes of me, it's like they work with influencers in our scene, with doctors that tell us we need to do this particular therapy. There's like these catch-all kind of gold standards that we need to buy into in order to maybe look like everyone else or get the healing that everyone else is getting. But it can create this kind of vacuum where that's all you know when it comes to a good
Mm,
therapy.
yeah. And the way it kind of gets plugged as being like the gold standard, the go-to, getting a lot of social media and influencer kind of attention, can actually leave consumers being quite thin on what these things actually are, which is part of why we wanted to hear from Gina today about, what really is CBT, what really is EMDR.
Hmm. Absolutely. You actually have had training in EMDR, but we kind of thought bringing Gina in, who works with this quite closely,
Yeah.
would allow us both to, I guess, speak to something more fully. The reason why is because you and I are hook, line, sinker psychodynamic. So
Yeah.
we kind of felt like it'd be a very weird thing for us to talk about all these therapies that we know of, but aren't experts in.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and my training in CBT was a long time ago. It was mostly around my work in addictions, which was more than 3 years ago. I won't give an exact timeline on that. Um, but let's cue it over to Gina to tell us a little bit about what she sees with CBT in her office.
At its core, CBT is about understanding the connection between our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Many people don't realize how much their inner dialogue shapes their emotions and actions until we start breaking it down. For example, a client struggling with social anxiety might think, everyone at this party will judge me. And that belief triggers anxiety, leading them to the behavior of avoidance of social situations, which reinforces their fear. In CBT, we challenge that thought. Is there evidence that everyone is judging you? What's a more balanced way to look at this? So, with practice, those automatic negative thoughts become easier to catch and reframe. And over time, clients feel more in control of their emotions instead of being ruled by them. Now, there's lots of pros to CBT. It's structured and goal oriented. This is especially helpful for clients who like having clear strategies and action steps rather than open ended exploration. It also teaches lifelong skills. You can always use these techniques that we learn in CBT, like challenging negative thinking, having behavioral experiments, and mindfulness. These can be used long after you're in need of therapy for any particular event or distress you're feeling. It's a great way to just go through life to be able to capture negative thoughts, reframe them, get yourself centered when you're feeling a bit triggered or feeling overwhelmed. These are all really great skills that you learn in CBT that works well way beyond the therapy session. It also works well for anxiety and depression and negative self talk. There's so much research papers around it. It's been branded as the gold standard for therapy treatment because many clients do see a noticeable improvement within a few sessions, especially if they actively practice the techniques outside of the therapy session. And CBT is great for short term therapy because it's skill based and even a handful of sessions can provide tools that can help the client manage their emotions more effectively. So, in essence, they become their own therapists. Now, there are challenges around CBT, especially if there's limited sessions that you're working with. And it's not always enough for deeper, long standing issues. If someone has complex trauma or deeply ingrained self beliefs, CBT alone may not be enough. A person who's been told you're not good enough their entire life won't just reframe that belief overnight. It takes deeper processing, which is where EMDR or other approaches may be more effective. Also, some people struggle with the homework aspect, particularly my clients who have ADHD. It's really tough for them to go through worksheets and log their thoughts or practice techniques between sessions. While it does help reinforce progress, some clients feel resistant to therapy homework, and that can slow down results. It can also feel too cognitive. Yes, CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. But for some, it's like it's too much of the brain and the thinking and not emotional enough. They may find that it's just too focused on logic and thought when they really need emotional processing. If someone is in deep grief, or experiencing trauma responses, they may need more than just cognitive strategies. Like, I know how I think about this, but I really want to address how I feel. Also, limited sessions can feel rushed. Even if you have, say, 12 sessions, it may feel like a long time when you start, but when you get halfway through, you're like, well, we just scratched the surface. It really doesn't feel like it's enough time. And if therapy is short term, CBT can work well for specific concerns like reducing panic attacks or managing negative thinking. But for more complex issues, clients may feel that they're just, again, scratching the surface when the time runs out and they may leave unsatisfied. They may leave with tools and strategies, but they may not feel completely held in that space and that it's truly therapeutic for them. So, my final thoughts is that CBT is a great tool, but again, it's not a one size fits all. I've seen CBT completely change people's lives for the better, especially when they're motivated to use the techniques consistently. But it's important to remember that it's one tool in the therapy toolbox, not the right fit for every person or every situation. For short term therapy, CBT can be a game changer, helping clients leave with practical skills rather than just insight. But for deeper, long-standing emotional wounds, I would say it often works best when combined with other approaches that allow for deeper healing.
One of the things that Gina just says here that I think is really interesting with CBT is that it's actually incredibly good for tackling a pretty solution-based problem. I'm thinking for myself when a client might be interested in this. I think if you have a phobia, something that like you're going on a plane and you're really scared of flying, CBT can be an excellent place. Can also be for if you have OCD or other tendencies within anxiety that you really want something clear, concise, solution focused. That can be really, really helpful. I would be interested in kind of the other take that Gina has that we were kind of when we were talking to her about what she says about it with, let's say, CPTSD, which can be complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people often say childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, depending on how you're referring to it. Now, what she says about this is really interesting, and I've seen this in my office as well, that when it comes to a complex trauma, when it comes to something from childhood, sometimes being able to understand our maladaptive thoughts is something that clients have already done.
Hmm.
And when someone comes to me for kind of more in depth, getting to the root of it, longer term therapy, it's not uncommon for them already have done CBT, for them
Mhm.
done some of the cognitive work, and they're still facing the same maladaptations. And here's why I think that is, Ryan. When a client has faced trauma, you usually know how to read the world in a particular way to keep you safe. And a lot of people with trauma then are incredibly good at reading people to make sure they're safe. And therefore can also read themselves in certain ways. So they might know that we can use attachment theory here, like they might have an avoidant attachment. They might know everything that it means. And then they get into a relationship and they have severe anxiety and they don't want to trust this person. And they might find themselves pushing away. And coming to me is going into the roots, linking into it. And so I can see why Gina would say CBT might not be for every single therapy. And I think the problem that I see for myself then is that when a client only knows that this is the route to get help, it can actually really bind their hands and make them feel helpless when that help isn't helping.
Right. It can almost become another barrier to getting care and getting the support that you need. I think there's a lot of kind of places where CBT and other therapies have been, I say, tainted by the medical model, which maybe sounds a little dramatic, but those are my feelings.
You feel your
And
feelings.
I'm a little dramatic, so there we go. Um, by that, what I really mean is a lot of the reason that folks might be hearing about CBT and EMDR may in part be coming from their medical doctors
Mm,
saying, oh, you need to go get this. And I think it's wonderful that medical doctors are referring people to therapy and encouraging their clients to get, other supports besides medication, that might be a more kind of holistic and effective approach in combination with medication, which we'll talk about later.
mhm.
Um, it does mean that they're hearing about a relatively limited group of therapies that tend to map on well with the medical model because the therapies also say, I have a 12 session plan or I have a 6 session plan for CBT that will help you with your anxiety. CBT lends itself very well, as does EMDR, to research because it
Yeah.
has this very structured approach and you take measurements at certain points. And so it's easy to demonstrate when and where it's effective. Other therapies that are less structured and maybe have less specific kind of pre-planned outcomes are more difficult for a particular scientific model to measure.
Well, yeah. I mean, the medical model is based on being like effective, efficacious, has good validity. You're looking at a research model that can lend itself to that because you have these strict rules, as you say, but also allows itself to then feel like a solve and fix solution.
Right.
Whereas something like psychodynamic, potentially narrative therapy, internal family systems therapy, like there's these therapies that are actually incredibly complex, robust, take time, and therefore maybe don't get to have that same level of solve and fix solution that doctors can think CBT does.
Hmm.
But as I said before, a lot of clients that come to me have tried this, and it hasn't necessarily been the solve and fix that they were told it was going to be.
In fact, I'm thinking as you're saying that there was a time when I was taking antidepressants, and I was doing like a routine checkup with my medical doctor about continuing to receive these medications. And they asked me in that if I was seeing a therapist. And I was, and I said I am, and they asked what kind of therapy,
Hmm.
and I said psychoanalysis. I'd been in analysis for like 4 years or something, and the person said to me, the medical doctor said to me, "Well, CBT is the only effective one."
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, depressed. I was in withdrawal from my meds. It was not a nice time in many ways, but I've always thought back on that and be like, how comical. I was maybe less than a year out from finishing a doctorate in psychotherapy, and I was just informed that what I was doing apparently isn't the only kind of therapy that works. And that's when I start to see this idea of it being tainted by the medical model, where I have every belief that that medical doctor has good intentions in their work and wants their patients to get what they see as the best support, and was also provided with a very limited scope of information
Mm.
because medical school isn't about that,
No.
with which to advise their patients.
I think that's a brilliant example. It kind of touches in on just an everyday mode of what we hear when it comes to getting help.
Yeah.
EMDR feels new to me. Is EMDR as new as I
No,
think it is? Okay.
no. She's super hot right now. Very trending. Um, And I think, like with most new research that comes out, like it takes a while before the mainstream really sinks their teeth into it.
Sure.
1987 is the date that we put on EMDR being
Okay.
kind of created. So
Hmm.
it's been around for a minute. And it's been kind of perfected and refined through that time as well. But right now it's become much more of kind of a household term. People are more likely to have heard of it, even if they might not know the details of what it means.
I would love for any listener that doesn't know, and I'm throwing myself under this bus, to kind of just hear Gina be able to say a little bit about what is EMDR. And so being able to kind of just hear a little bit will give us a good foothold for talking about this.
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a powerful therapy that helps people heal from painful or traumatic experiences. Think of it like this: when something upsetting or distressing happens, our brain naturally tries to process it, like how a cut on your skin heals over time. But sometimes, when an event is really overwhelming, it gets stuck in our nervous system. So instead of fading into the past as just a memory, it keeps playing on repeat, making us relive it emotionally as if it's still happening. So EMDR helps the brain unstick those memories so they can be processed in a way that is no longer triggering. And it uses bilateral stimulation, such as eye movements, tapping, or sounds, to help the brain reprocess the experience in a healthier way. For example, let's say you were in a car accident. Even though you're physically fine now, you may still flinch at the sound of screeching tires or feel anxious just driving past the spot where it happened. EMDR can help your brain make peace with that experience so you remember it, but it no longer controls your emotions in the present. Now, I mentioned bilateral stimulation a moment earlier, and I want to explain that a bit further as it's pretty integral to EMDR. So, bilateral stimulation, BLS for short, is a rhythmic back and forth stimulation of the brain, usually through eye movements or tapping or sounds. And in EMDR therapy, it's used to help the brain reprocess distressing memories in a way that reduces their emotional charge, turns down the volume, so to speak. So think of it like this: when we sleep, our brain naturally processes memories during the rapid eye movement, also known as the REM stage, when our eyes move side to side. And this is how the brain organizes experiences. It metabolizes the day, making sense of what happened and storing it properly. But when a traumatic event occurs, that natural processing can get disrupted, again, leaving the memory stuck in a raw, unprocessed form. That's why it's so disruptive. So, BLS replicates the REM stage of sleep and it kickstarts the brain's ability to process those stuck memories. It's almost like hitting resume on a paused healing process. It also allows the person to maintain dual attention, keeping them grounded in the present as they revisit the memory in a controlled, safe way. So, BLS is an important anchor in the processing and desensitization stage of EMDR therapy. It engages both sides of the brain, and that helps the brain to reprocess the memories in a way that feels less overwhelming. It's like taking an old, cluttered file on your desktop, organizing it neatly, and tucking it away in a folder where it belongs. So it's no longer popping up unexpectedly and disrupting your day. For example, if someone has a traumatic memory of being yelled at as a child, their brain may have stored that experience with all the fear and helplessness they felt at the time. So, whenever something reminds them of that moment, even unconsciously, they may still react with the same emotional intensity they had as a child. Now, with EMDR and bilateral stimulation, the brain starts to recognize, hey, that was then, this is now. And that distress fades, and the memory becomes just part of the past without carrying the same emotional weight.
So, as Gina was saying, EMDR can really actually take time.
Yeah.
It's not a quick fix, right? And we'll kind of hear a little bit more about that from her soon as well. Kind of interesting, like I just wanted to briefly touch on where EMDR came from. So Francine Shapiro first kind of had the idea that led her to do research into creating EMDR because she was going for a walk. She's
Hmm.
going for a walk and she was thinking about some distressing things, and she noticed that her mind wouldn't linger on the distressing things when she was walking and looking around. And
Okay.
this kind of led to that first impetus of like, about walking is helping.
Mm.
And through research, she kind of determined that it was this bilateral stimulation of looking side to side, scanning your environment, as well as alternating use of different sides of your body. I think it's kind of a fun walking led to a really quite brilliant and prolific researcher
Mhm.
creating this new form of therapy. And her one of the big theories that is kind of the driver behind EMDR is the AIP, or Adaptive Information Processing Model. Basically, this is just a theory that says our brains have a natural way of coping with distressing information, traumatic experiences, painful memories, and that sometimes trauma can stop us from being able to process it. It freezes us from being able to use our normal brain's way of healing. And EMDR is a method to force your brain to go into that adaptive processing. Part of adaptive processing is that kind of like that we forget a lot of painful things, or as time goes on, they lose their edge. Hence, people like get back into relationships again, or have babies again, kind of things that like our brains and bodies
Yeah.
forget some of,
Mm.
so that we can continue to exist, because it would be a little unbearable if we didn't forget a bit, right?
Gina also kind of links this also with REM sleep, that our eyes are going back and forth as we're kind of cataloging the day. Trauma can short circuit that, and so EMDR kind of allows you to have an awake stasis of being able to process that. Hence the BLS, the bilateral stimulation, the back and forth movement. And there's a number of ways, I guess, that you can actually do this. And it has become a superstar when it comes to the field of trauma, that this is often what I can see or at least hear about that people would like to experience in order to help them. And I'm not going to lie, just like CBT, it does help. If
Mm,
there are certain places where you need this help and you're ready for it, you can definitely undergo this. But as you perfectly said, and Gina did too, you're not having one session of EMDR and then you're done. So now she's noticed that some clients have already noticed if they're processing one thing, they can already feel a little bit less heavy by end of sesh. But to really be able to dive into this, you're usually not just doing one thing and then you're done.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, and that, the setup for EMDR can take several sessions. For some folks, it might even take months, because you actually have to be in a place when you're able to kind of tolerate some level of distress. So if you're very quickly and easily triggered into a trauma response, which some people are, um, then you're not going to be able to do the EMDR reprocessing. So they can spend a lot of time building trust, building skills to be able to get ready to do that. And that's one of those places where it's, as actually Gina says too, like it's this is not a magic wand. It still takes time, it still takes work. We kind of asked Gina to tell us a little bit about how someone knows if they're ready for EMDR as a way to kind of think about when this might be most effective.
So, what would make you ready for EMDR? You don't have to be in a perfect emotional place to start EMDR, but you do need some tools to manage distress if it comes up. If someone's in a crisis, or struggling with addiction, or has no coping strategies for stress, we would focus on building that foundation first, and that would happen in the preparation phase of EMDR therapy. Think of it like training for a marathon. You wouldn't start with a 10-mile run on day one. We want to make sure you have the emotional muscles to handle the process. And this might mean practicing grounding techniques like deep breathing, visualization, or self soothing exercises before we dive into deeper trauma work. A good question to ask yourself is, do I have ways to calm myself down when I feel overwhelmed? If the answer is no, then your therapist will likely help you develop those skills before beginning EMDR. It's absolutely essential. How long does it take for EMDR to work? It depends. Some people notice a shift in just a few sessions, especially if they're working on a single event trauma like a car accident or a bad breakup, while others, particularly those with complex trauma from childhood or long term stress, they may need more time. On average, EMDR therapy consists of about 6 to 12 sessions, but everyone's journey is different. Some clients spend months at the preparation stage before they're ready to move on to desensitizing and reprocessing trauma, and that's okay. One of the cool things about EMDR is that it has the potential to work faster than traditional talk therapy because we're not just talking about the trauma, we're helping the brain itself resolve it. I've seen people come in saying, I'll never get over this, and then walk out weeks later saying, I feel lighter. I can finally breathe again. It doesn't feel as distressing to me when I think about this memory now. And that's the magic of EMDR. It doesn't erase the past, but it helps you move forward without it holding you back. Something that's important to note is that EMDR isn't about erasing memories, it's about healing from them. By following the 8 phases, you're not just coping with the past, you're actually rewiring your brain's response to it. And this is big. And over time, the things that once triggered anxiety, fear, or shame start to feel distant, like old stories rather than present day wounds. Clients often say, I can remember what happened, but it doesn't feel like it controls me anymore. And that's the power of EMDR. It helps you to move forward and frees you from the painful memories of the past.
Think that there's a lot of questions around all these modalities, but EMDR, because it's something that's just getting into the public sphere, we actually got Gina to talk a lot about it, including all of the stages of EMDR and what it all means. And we have a lot of awesome kind of sound bites of her being able to talk about it. And as you can tell, Ryan and I were a bit flabbergasted by just how soothing Gina sounds. So
Very
if you,
soothing.
oh my goodness, she needs to work for Headspace. She's so good. We put this all on our website at centeredself.ca. Check out all these like videos, and you'll get to see me doing pottery because I decided to attach something alongside it to be soothed into the world of knowing if EMDR is for you. And if so, reach out to us. But I think for us, one of the things we want to do in this episode is talk about the fact that when you get these big modalities, there's a couple things that can happen. One, you don't actually know if they're going to work for you necessarily, hence why we have some more videos, but also it can feel like that's the only way to go. And with just hearing about this kind of trendy thing, it's hard to know if this is going to be your ticket out of here. anyone with mental health issues kind of wants a ticket out of here. We want to stop feeling the way we're feeling. We want to feel like we can get a handle on some of these thoughts, feelings, just states of being. And when we hear of all these kind of trendy modalities, it can be hard to know where we fit in them, I guess, is what I
Mm.
would say.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. And the links for all these additional videos are going to be in the description box of this episode. Um, it's important we're recognizing that it's not quick. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone. It's also important to kind of dispel any rumor that it's easy.
Yeah.
One of the big things that we're trained with in EMDR is talking clients through what they might experience after the session, that people may feel sick, nauseous, easily triggered, just exhausted.
Hmm.
I actually have a friend right now who is using EMDR, and sometimes um, they'll contact me after the session and just say like how intense or heavy it's been, or how they're feeling really overwhelmed or exhausted, or like, oh, now I have to go home and like do normal family stuff, and I don't feel the energy for that. So
Hmm.
just to kind of know that, like with any therapy, like I often tell
Yeah.
clients with psychodynamic, you're not going to feel good at the end of every session. Over time there will be progress. Some sessions you're going to leave feeling nice, and some sessions you're going to leave feeling like, wow, I've got a lot of work to do, or I'm really struggling right now.
That process is so important. And I think that there can be a lot of pain when things that are said within trends are made to look like an answer
Mm,
and sometimes don't necessarily have that immediate intended effect. I'm thinking about medications, which have been around forever, but still often the first kind of grab a hold when we're feeling depressed, anxious. Meds can give us a certain level of validity to what we're feeling. They can also make us feel like we are that, which we talked about when we were talking about social media trends, that we become the thing that we're feeling. I am an avoidant attached person. I am depressed. This is me. Um, and I think that that can really be difficult. For example,
mm,
antipsychotic meds can have a really adverse effect on what your identity is. Um, and that can be tricky to navigate. And
mhm,
also, they're not necessarily going to save the day. They can help us regulate some of the kind of chemistry in our brains to help us, but they're not going to make us automatically not depressed. And clients can feel really disheartened by this, and they can also feel incredibly disheartened by some of the side effects.
mhm,
I've had clients come to me taking meds that are now feeling disheartened that they're gaining weight, or that they can't sleep at night, or that they no longer have the same libido that they once did. Sometimes these quick fixes that we really want can actually make us feel like there might not be hope in sight when the very things that we're feeling are also causing us to have other problems.
People have sought this kind of solution to their health for a long time, right? And long history in herbal medicine of using St. John's wort, which has some of the same effects that modern antidepressants have. It's a flower, not an actual wart. Um,
I like that distinction,
Yeah,
Ryan.
there you go. Um, and even we know things that like Vincent van Gogh used foxglove, which was often used for mental health back in the day, and is actually probably one of the reasons why he liked the color yellow so much, is because the vibrancy of the color yellow is a side effect of foxglove, which is another flower. A lot of flowers back in the day. So the frustrating or confusing side effects, as well as the sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it takes a long time to work. Something that I identify as having been disheartening in the past for me, where I'm like, I need help today.
Yeah.
And some part of my mind thinks that taking this pill is just going to do it. And the doctor and everyone else that's a professional of this is telling me actually it's probably going to be 3 to 4 weeks before you notice.
Any difference.
any
Yeah.
difference. You'll notice the side effects much sooner than that, though. So those can really feel like barriers to patients and clients.
When you're talking about this, I kind of started to think about this aspect that we're talking about today of trend, but
Mm,
also the medical model and how both of these can kind of get wrapped up together in our field. Whereas taking foxglove or St. John's wort can almost be dismissed as woo woo, like something that that isn't as scientific or good as these new pharmaceuticals that are on like the table. And all of it can feel really tricky when you're just struggling and you want the fix that somebody who's a professional is telling you to get.
absolutely, yeah. And it's really important, I think, to just identify that there are a lot of things that are thought of as woo-woo that actually have decades,
Long standing.
centuries, millennia of
Yeah.
long-standing research behind them. It wasn't done in the way we do a certain type of research now,
Mhm.
but herbal practitioners did look into how and why things worked, and they saw similar repeated results many times over.
Mhm.
So I love that you said that. We're also kind of thinking about another trend that we've been noticing. It's getting a lot of discussion right now in therapy is psychedelics in therapy.
Mhm.
And we are going to have an episode pretty soon where we get to interview another registered psychotherapist, Monica Lau, about her expertise in working with psychedelics.
Yeah. She's been working at different ketamine clinics as a psychotherapist alongside psychologists, which right now is the regulated way of taking psychedelic therapies, and has really noticed in her practice the many clients that are coming with anxiety or depression to kind of have these treatments help them save the day. And she's noticed, just like I have, and the way that I've seen it in different podcasts or media, that they can have this almost same quick fix idea, that you
Hmm.
have this one incredibly eye-inspiring trip, which I'm not going to say you can't. Oh my goodness. But like that assumption that you're going to have this amazing trip and then everything will make sense. You'll be connected with your ancestors and this will be just this incredible self-awareness that's going to save the day.
Hmm.
And one of the things that Monica said, I've noticed as well in my practice, working alongside clients who've taken this type of therapy, it may not have that intended effect. And that can be so disheartening.
Hmm.
I decided to actually ask Monica about this very question, about one of the kind of pains of not having the attendance effect that psychedelics might have. Again, this is an expert in the field that isn't me or you, because we're
Yeah.
not. And so I thought I would just let Monica speak for herself right now.
Disappointment coming up in the use of psychedelics is a real thing. And it's something that we don't often talk about because there is so much attention and awe paid towards those really prolific experiences that psychedelics can bring on. And with disappointment, as we can feel with anything that we might be trying, that might just be that thing, that letdown, the feeling of failure, it continuing to add to a narrative that a client might already be working on that psychedelics was supposed to fix is really important. With that comes an understanding that there's no one thing that's going to flip the switch and make things better, make you a different person, make you whole, make you healed. And it's all part of that journey. And with psychedelics, through intentional preparation, through long integration, allowing the process to unfold, sometimes lessons aren't even learned till like maybe a year or two after the actual experience, is allowing patience as well. So this is a really interesting thing that I'd like to get into a little bit more, is dealing with letdown, with this magical thing that's supposed to fix everything.
I think that's so interesting what she's saying,
Hmm.
that clients are coming in hoping that this one experience of therapy will then help them. But she has to do the before care with clients. She has to do the aftercare. And sometimes the aftercare is actually being with them in their disheartened feeling that that didn't actually save the day. It wasn't just a snap of the fingers and they're done.
And I think what you're saying there really has a through line with what we're talking about with all therapies today where there can be this sense of disappointment that the thing I tried that I thought was going to be the fix didn't fix it. There's still more work to do, or I need to do it again, or actually I just found out from my fabulous EMDR practitioner that this is probably going to take several many months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as like a way to kind of really turn the corner on this and like actually talk about a constructive part, not just deconstructing these different therapies, which is so awesome, but then turning it to like a constructive approach is to remember that you really, no matter what therapy you're choosing, at the end of the day, the number one thing that's going to help you is actually feeling safe and having a trusting relationship. There's so much to be done in this field when it comes to different modalities and what might suit different things. Um, we'll link a video where I actually talk about all the different modalities so that you can just feel like you might know a little bit more, especially when you might just be hearing this one size fits all approach. But there's an incredible amount of research out there that talks about it does not matter what modality you seek. Psychodynamic with us, CBT with Gina or EMDR, thinking about different psychedelic therapies, thinking about narrative, IFS, all these different therapies. It's actually finding somebody that you feel like you can lean on and they're not going to back away, that you have a strength of a pillar. And that relationship is the healing part of therapy. We are the therapy, and being able to find somebody that feels like they've got you is where healing comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so another important thing that kind of goes with that is just because you've tried a certain type of therapy and it didn't feel right doesn't necessarily mean that that was because it was the type of therapy. It might be that maybe the practitioner wasn't the right fit for you, or maybe they did it in a way that didn't quite work for you. We hear this through line about the importance of relationship and trust in all the types of therapies that we've talked about today. Good
Yep.
CBT and EMDR practitioners like Gina talk about the beginning stages of building trust and needing everything to be set up and containing.
Mhm.
Monica is also going to talk about setting up the before care and after care of psychedelics and the kind of trust and relationship that needs to be built in around that. And you've heard Jess and I talk about that time and time again. We're all about that relationship. We're all about that trust.
Mhm.
So I think a big takeaway for me today is make sure you get a provider that feels like the right fit for you.
But that's also just thinking about who would you want to trust? Is it somebody that is going to give you some very concrete solution-based practices? Is that something you really need right now? Is it diving into the past and being able to look at the root of what's going on for you? And that might take a long time and you're ready for that. Is it somebody that's going to help you process an emotion in a way that you can actually be less triggered by that very thought? Jeannie uses that great example of a car accident, that if that's something that really impacted you and being able to hear a sound and not be triggered by it, like that, figuring out these things takes a bit of time and research, but it is about thinking about who do you need and then what kind of therapy. And beyond any of the kind of catch-all approaches that are being out there right now, just remembering that if you trust somebody, healing can and will happen, I think.
Absolutely.
And if you are really looking for pointers on how to find a good therapist, our very first episode of this season, season 2, is exactly about that. Really, what we're talking about is finding the fit that works for you. And so if you haven't listened to that, go back, check it out.
Thank you all for listening today.
Yeah, and thank you so much to Gina and Monica for being our guests. We haven't done that before, and it was actually really cool.
Uh-oh.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, check out our others. And stay tuned for even more episodes coming up.
Follow us and leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please tell your friends.
You can also follow us on Instagram too, at Your Therapist Is Not Okay. Also, if you have any questions that you want us to answer, send us a DM there. We would love to answer your questions. And a lot of our topics come from listeners just like you.